Good evening. Um, Thank you very much for joining me. My name's Grant. I am the host of River Valley Radio. I almost forgot that there. You have to forgive me. I'm a bit of a div. I'm also the Prime Minister of New Strathclyde. I'm just going to make sure that people can hear me, which they can. That is absolutely excellent. I come back to you again this week. I don't have an interview. I haven't had an interview for like a couple of months, but just thought get some content out. Let's read The Lord of the Rings and just get on with that. The tune that you just heard was Lofen and Jask's Don't Stop Now. It's electronic music. It's an NCS release. You can find it in the description below if you like that kind of thing. Personally, I do, but my opinion doesn't really matter. So anyway, let's get back into it. So we were sort of last time we were sort of at Bilbo, just sort of leaving, going off on his adventure. If you've seen the movies, he travels, I think, to Rivendell or something like that, but it doesn't really explain it in the book. So just to get back into it, he paused, silent for a moment. Then, without another word, he turned away from the lights and voices in the field and tents, and followed by his three companions, went round into his garden and trotted down the long sloping path. He jumped over a low place in the hedge at the bottom and took to the meadows, passing it into the night like a rustle of wind in the grass. Gandalf remained for a while, staring after him into the darkness. "Goodbye, my dear Bilbo, until our next meeting," he said softly, and went back indoors. Frodo came in soon afterwards, and found him sitting in the dark, deep in thought. "Has he gone?" he asked. "Yes," answered Gandalf. "He is gone at last." "I wish, I mean, I hoped until this evening that it was only a joke," said Frodo. "But I knew in my heart that he really meant to go. He always used to joke about serious things. I wish I'd come back sooner just to see him off." "I think really he preferred slipping off quietly in the end," said Gandalf. "Don't be too troubled. He'll be all right. Now, he left a packet for you. There it is." Frodo took the envelope from the mantelpiece and glanced at it, but did not open it. "You'll find his will and all the other documents in there, I think," said the wizard. You are the master of Bag End now, and also, I fancy, you'll find a golden ring." "The ring!" exclaimed Frodo. "Has he left me that? I wonder why. Still, it may be useful." "It may, and it may not," said Gandalf. "I should not make use of it if I were you, but keep it secret and keep it safe. Now, I am going to bed." As Master of Bag End, Frodo felt it his painful duty to say good-bye to the guests. Rumours of strange events had by now spread all over the field, but Frodo would only say, "No doubt everything will be cleared up in the morning." About midnight, carriages came for the important folk. One by one they rolled away, filled with full but very unsatisfied hobbits. Gardeners came by arrangement and removed in wheelbarrows those that had inadvertently remained behind. Night slowly passed. The sun rose. The hobbits rose rather later. Morning went on. People came and began, by orders, to clear away the pavilions and the tables and the chairs, and the spoons and knives and bottles and plates, and the lanterns, and the flowering shrubs and boxes, and the crumbs and cracker paper, the forgotten bags and gloves and handkerchiefs, and the uneaten food, a very small item. Then a number of other people came, without orders, Bagginses and Boffins and Bulgars and Tooks, and other guests that lived or were staying near. By midday, when even the best fed were out and about again, there was a large crowd at Bag End, uninvited but not unexpected. Frodo was waiting on the step, smiling, but looking rather tired and worried. He welcomed all the callers, but he had not much more to say than before. His reply to all inquiries was simply this: "Mr. Bilbo Baggins has gone far away, as far as I know, for good." Some of the visitors he invited to come inside, as Bilbo had left messages for them. Inside in the hall there was piled a large assortment of packages and parcels, and small articles of furniture. On every item there was a label tied. There were several labels of this sort. "For Adelard Took, for his very own, from Bilbo." On an umbrella Adelard had carried off many unlabelled ones. "For Dora Baggins, in memory of a long correspondence, with love from Bilbo." On a large waste paper basket. Dora was Drogo's sister and the eldest surviving female relative of Bilbo and Frodo. She was 99 and had written reams of good advice for more than half a century. "For Milo Burrows, hoping it will be useful, from BB." On a gold pen and ink bottle. Milo never answered letters. "For Angelica's use, from Uncle Bilbo." On a round convex mirror. She was a young Baggins, and too obviously considered her face shapely. "For the collection of Hugo Bracegirdle," from a contributor. On an empty bookcase. Hugo was a great borrower of books, and worse than usual at returning them. "For Lobelia Sackville Baggins, as a present." On a case of silver spoons. Bilbo believed that she had acquired a good many of his spoons while he was away on his former journey. Lobelia knew that quite well. When she arrived late in the day, she took the point at once, but she also took the spoons. This is only a small selection of the assembled presents. Bilbo's residence had got rather cluttered up with things in the course of his long life. It was a tendency of hobbit holes to get cluttered up, for which the custom of giving so many birthday presents was largely responsible. Not, of course, that the birthday presents were always new. There were one or two old mathams of forgotten uses that had circulated all around the district, but Bilbo had usually given new presents and kept those that he received. The old hole was now being cleared a little. Every one of the various parting gifts had labels, written out personally by Bilbo, and several had some point or some joke. But of course, most of the things were given where they would be wanted and welcome. The poorer hobbits, and especially those of Bagshot Row, did very well. Old Gaffer Gamgee got 2 sacks of potatoes, a new spade, a woolen waistcoat, and a bottle of ointment for creaking joints. Old Rory Brandybuck, in return for much hospitality, got a dozen bottles of Old Wynyards, a strong red wine from the South Farthing, and now quite mature, as it had been laid down by Bilbo's father. Rory quite forgave Bilbo, and voted him a capital fellow after the first bottle. There was plenty of everything left for Frodo, and of course all the chief treasures, as well as the books, pictures, and more than no sign nor mention of money or jewellery. Not a penny piece or a glass bead was given away. Frodo had a very trying time that afternoon. A false rumour that the whole household was being distributed free spread like wildfire, and before long the place was packed with people who had no business there, but could not be kept out. Labels got torn off and mixed, and quarrels broke out. Some people tried to do swaps and deals in the hall, and others tried to make off with minor items not addressed to them, or with anything that seemed unwanted or unwatched. The road to the gate was blocked with barrows and handcarts. In the middle of the commotion, the Sackville Bagginses arrived. Frodo had retired for a while, and left his friend, Merry Brandybuck, to keep an eye on things. When Othel loudly demanded to see Frodo, Merry bowed politely. "He's indisposed," he said. "He's resting." "Hiding, you mean," said Lobelia. "Anyway, we want to see him, and we mean to see him. Just go and tell him so." Merry left them a long while in the hall, and they had time to discover their parting gift of spoons. It did not improve their tempers. Eventually they were shown into the study. Frodo was sitting at a table with a lot of papers in front of him. He looked indisposed, to see Sackville Bagginses at any rate, and he stood up, fidgeting with something in his pocket, but he spoke quite politely. The Sackville Bagginses were rather offensive. They began by offering him bad bargain prices, as between friends, for various valuable and unlabelled things. When Frodo replied that only the things specially directed by Bilbo were being given away, they said the whole affair was very fishy. Only one thing is clear to me," said Otho, "and that is you are doing exceedingly well out of it. I insist on seeing the will." Otho would have been Bilbo's heir, but for the adoption of Frodo. He read the will carefully and snorted. It was unfortunately very clear and correct. According to the legal customs of hobbits, which demand, among other things, 7 signatures of witnesses in red ink. "Foiled again," he said to his wife. "And after waiting 60 years! Spoons! Fiddlesticks!" He snapped his fingers under Frodo's nose and stumped off. But Lobelia was not so easy to get rid of. A little later, Frodo came out of the study to see how things were going on, and found her still about the place, investigating nooks and corners and tapping the floors. He escorted her firmly off the premises, after he had relieved her of several small but rather valuable articles that had somehow fallen inside her umbrella. Her face looked as if she was in the throes of thinking out a really crushing parting remark. But all she found to say, turning round on the step, was, "You'll live to regret it, young fellow. Why didn't you go too? You don't belong here. You're no Baggins. You're a Brandybuck." "Did you hear that, Mary? That was an insult, if you like," said Frodo, as he shut the door on her. "It was a compliment," said Merry Brandybuck, "and so, of course, not true." Then they went round the hole, and evicted 3 young hobbits, 2 boffins and a bulger, who were knocking holes in the walls of one of the cellars. Frodo also had a tussle with the young Sancho Proudfoot, old Odo's Proudfoot grandson, who'd begun an excavation in the larger pantry where he thought there was an echo. The legend of Bilbo's gold excited both curiosity and hope, for legendary gold, mysteriously obtained if not positively ill-gotten, is, as everyone knows, anyone's for the finding, unless the search is interrupted. When he'd overcome Sancho and pushed him out, Frodo collapsed on a chair in the hall. "It's time to close the shop, Merry," he said. "Lock the door and don't open it to anyone today, not even if they bring a battering ram." Then he went to revive himself with a belated cup of tea. He'd hardly sat down when there came a soft knock at the front door. Lobelia again, most likely, he thought. She must have thought of something really nasty and have come back to say it. It can wait. He went on with his tea. The knock was repeated, much louder, but he took no notice. Suddenly, the wizard's head appeared at the window. "If you don't let me in, Frodo, I shall blow your door right down your hole, and out through the hill," he said. "My dear Gandalf, half a minute," cried Frodo, running out of the room to the door. Come in, come in. I thought it was Lobelia." "Then I forgive you. But I saw her some time ago, driving a pony trap towards Bywater, with a face that would have curdled new milk." "She had already nearly curdled me, honestly. I nearly tried on Bilbo's ring. I longed to disappear." "Don't do that," said Gandalf, sitting down. "Do be careful of that ring, Frodo. In fact, it's partly about that I've come to say a last word." "Well, what about it? What do you know already?" "Only what Bilbo told me. I've heard the story, how he found it, and how he used it on his journey, I mean." "Which story, I wonder?" said Gandalf. "Oh, not what he told the dwarves and put it in his book," said Frodo. "He told me the true story soon after I came to live here," he said. "You pressed him till he told you, so I'd better know too. No secrets between us, Frodo," he said. "But they're not to go any further. It's mine anyway." "That's interesting," said Gandalf. "Well, what did you think of it all?" "If you mean inventing all that about a present, well, I thought the true story much more likely, and I couldn't see the point of altering it at all. It was very unlike Bilbo to do so. Anyway, I thought that rather odd." "So did I. But odd things may happen to people that have such treasures, if they use them. Let it be a warning to you to be very careful with it. It may have other powers than just making you vanish when you wish to." "I don't understand," said Frodo. "Neither do I," answered the wizard. "I've merely begun to wonder about the ring, especially since last night. No need to worry, but if you take my advice, you will use it very seldom, or not at all. At least, I beg you not to use it in any way that will cause talk or rouse suspicion. I say again, keep it safe, and keep it secret." "You are very mysterious. What are you afraid of?" "I'm not certain, so I will say no more. I may be able to tell you something when I come back. I'm going off at once, so this is goodbye for the present." He got up. "At once?" cried Frodo. "Why, I thought you were staying on for at least a week. I was looking forward to your help." "I did mean to, but I've had to change my mind. I may be away for a good while, but I'll come and see you again as soon as I can. Expect me when you see me. I shall slip in quietly. I shan't often be visiting the Shire openly again. I find that I have become rather unpopular. They say I am a nuisance and a disturber of the peace. Some people are actually accusing me of spiriting Bilbo away, or worse. If you want to know, there is supposed to be a plot between you and me, to get hold of his wealth. Some people, exclaimed Frodo. You mean Otho and Lobelia? How abominable. I would give them Bag End and everything else if I could get Bilbo back and go off tramping in the country with him. I love the Shire, but I begin to wish, somehow, that I'd gone too. I wonder if I shall ever see him again. So do I, said Gandalf. And I wonder many other things. Goodbye now. Take care of yourself. Look out for me, especially at unlikely times. Goodbye. Frodo saw him to the door. He gave a final wave of his hand and walked off at a surprising pace. But Frodo thought the old wizard looked unusually bent, almost as if he was carrying a great weight. The evening was closing in, and his cloaked figure quickly vanished into the twilight. Frodo did not see him again for a long time. Chapter 2: The Shadow of the Past. I'm going to have a small smoke of my vape here, which you might hear, and I'll also have a drink of my beer. Then we'll just continue. Please bear with me. You probably heard that. Moving on. The talk did not die down in 9 or even 99 days. The second disappearance of Mr. Bilbo Baggins was discussed in Hobbiton, and indeed all over the Shire, for a year and a day, and was remembered much longer than that. It became a fireside story for young hobbits, and eventually Mad Baggins, who used to vanish with a bang and a flash and reappear with bags of jewels and gold, became a favourite character of legend and lived on long after all the true events were forgotten. But in the meantime, the general opinion in the neighbourhood was that Bilbo, who'd always been rather cracked, had at last gone quite mad, and had run off into the blue. There he had undoubtedly fallen into a pool or a river and come to a tragic, but hardly an untimely end. The blame was mostly laid on Gandalf. If only that dratted wizard will leave young Frodo alone, perhaps he'll settle down and grow some hobbit sense, they said. And to all appearance, the wizard did leave Frodo alone, and he did settle down. But the growth of hobbit sense was not very noticeable. Indeed, he at once began to carry on Bilbo's reputation for oddity. He refused to go into mourning, and the next year he was given a party in honour of Bilbo's 112th birthday, which he called a hundredweight feast. But that was short of the mark, for 20 guests were invited, and there were several meals at which it snowed, food and rained drink, as hobbits say. Some people were rather shocked, but Frodo kept up the custom of giving Bilbo's birthday party year after year until they get used to it. He said that he did not think Bilbo was dead when they asked, "Where is he then?" He shrugged his shoulders. He lived alone, as Bilbo had done, but he had a good many friends, especially among the younger hobbits, mostly descendants of the old Took, who had as children been fond of Bilbo and often in and out of Bag End. Folco Boffin and Fredgar Bolger were two of these, but his closest friends were Peregrine Took, usually called Pippin, and Merry Brandybuck. His real name was Meriadoc, but that was seldom remembered. Frodo went tramping over the Shire with them, but more often he wandered by himself, and to the amazement of sensible folk he was sometimes seen far from home, walking in the hills and woods under the starlight. Merry and Pippin suspected that he visited the elves at times, as Bilbo had done. As time went on, people began to notice that Frodo also showed signs of good preservation. Outwardly, he retained the appearance of a robust and energetic hobbit that was just out of his tweens. Some folk have all the luck, they said, but it was not until Frodo approached the usually more sober age of 50 that they began to think it queer. Frodo himself, after the first shock, found that being his own master and the Mr. Baggins of Bag End was rather pleasant. For some years he was quite happy and did not worry much about the future, but half unknown to himself the regret that he had not gone with Bilbo was steadily growing. He found himself wondering at times, especially in the autumn, about the wild lands, and the strange visions of mountains that he had never seen came into his dreams. He began to say to himself, "Perhaps I shall cross the river myself one day," to which the other half of his mind always replied, "Not yet." So it went on until his 40s were running out, and his 50th birthday was drawing near. 50 was a number that he felt was somehow significant, or ominous. It was at any rate at that age that adventure had suddenly befallen Bilbo. Frodo began to feel restless, and the old paths seemed too well trodden. He looked at maps, and wondered what lay beyond their edges. Maps made in the Shire showed mostly white spaces beyond its borders. He took to wandering further afield, and more often by himself, and Merry and his other friends watched him anxiously. Often he was seen walking and talking with the strange wayfarers that began at this time to appear in the Shire. There were rumours of strange things happening in the world outside, and as Gandalf had not at that time appeared or sent any message for several years, Frodo gathered all the news he could. Elves who seldom walked in the Shire could now be seen passing westward through the woods in the evening, passing and not returning, but they were leaving Middle-earth and were no longer concerned with its troubles. There were, however, dwarves on the road in unusual numbers. The ancient east-west road ran through the Shire to its end at the Grey Havens, and dwarves had always used it on their way to their mines in the Blue Mountains. They were hobbits' chief source of news from distant parts, if they wanted any. As a rule, dwarves said little and hobbits asked no more, but now Frodo often met strange dwarves of far countries seeking refuge in the west. They were troubled, and some spoke in whispers of the enemy and the land of Mordor. That name the hobbits only knew in legends of the dark past, like a shadow in the background of their memories. But it was ominous and disquieting. It seemed that the evil power in Mirkwood had been driven out by the White Council, only to reappear in greater strength in the old strongholds of Mordor. The Dark Tower had been rebuilt, it was said. From there the power was spreading far and wide, and away far east and south there were wars and growing fear. Orcs were multiplying again in the mountains. Trolls were abroad, no longer dull-witted, but cunning and armed with dreadful weapons. And there were murmured hints of creatures more terrible than all of these, but they had no name. Little of all this, of course, reached the ears of ordinary hobbits, but even the deafest of and most stayed at home began to hear queer tales, and those whose business took them to the borders saw strange things. The conversation in the Green Dragon at Bywater one evening in the spring of Frodo's 50th year showed that even in the comfortable heart of the Shire rumours had been heard, though most hobbits still laughed at them. Sam Gamgee was sitting in one corner near the fire, and opposite him was Ted Sandyman, the miller's son, and there were various other rustic hobbits listening to their talk. "Queer things you do hear these days, to be sure," said Sam. "Ah," said Ted, "you do, if you listen, but I can hear fireside tales and children's stories at home if I want to." "No doubt you can," retorted Sam, "and I dare say there's more truth in some of them than you reckon. Who invented the stories anyway? Take dragons now." "No, thank you," said Ted. "I won't. I heard tell of them when I was a youngster, But there's no call to believe in them now. There's only one dragon in Bywater, and that's Green, he said, getting a general laugh. Three men, these giants. Oh, hold on. I've lost my place. He said, getting a general laugh. All right, said Sam, laughing with the rest. But what about these three men, these giants, as you might call them? They do say that one bigger than a tree was seen up away beyond the North Moors not long back. Who's they? My cousin Hal, for one. He works for Mr. Boffin over at Overhill and goes up to the North Farthing for the hunting. He saw one. Says he did, perhaps. Your Hal's always saying he's seen things. And maybe he sees things that ain't there. But this one was as big as an elm tree and walking. Walking 7 yards to a stride. If it was an inch, then I bet it wasn't an inch. What he saw was an elm tree, as like as not. But this one was walking, I tell you, and there ain't no elm tree on the North Moors. Then Hal can't have seen one, said Ted. There was some laughing and clapping. The others seemed to think that Ted had scored a point. All the same, said Sam, you can't deny that others besides our Halfast have seen queer folk crossing the Shire. Crossing it, mind you, there are more that are turned back at the borders. The bounders have never been so busy before, and I've heard tell that elves are moving west. They do say they are going to the harbours, out away beyond the White Towers. Sam waved his arms vaguely. Neither be nor any of them knew how far it was to the sea, past the old Tibbles beyond the western borders of the Shire, but it was an old tradition that away over there stood the Grey Havens, from which at times elven ships set sail never to return. They are sailing, sailing, sailing over the sea. They are going into the west and leaving us, said Sam, half chanting the words, shaking his head sadly and solemnly. But Ted laughed. Well, that isn't anything new if you believe the old tales, and I don't see what it matters to me or you. Let them sail, but I warrant you haven't seen them doing it, nor anyone else in the Shire. Well, I don't know, said Sam thoughtfully. He believed he had once seen an elf in the woods, and still hoped to see more one day. Of all the legends that he had heard in his early years, such fragments of tales and half-remembered stories about the elves as the hobbits knew had always moved him most deeply. There are some, even in these parts, as know the fair folk and get news of them, he said. There's Mr. Baggins now that I work for. He told me that they were sailing, and he knows a bit about elves. And old Mr. Bilbo knew more. Many's the talk I had with him when I was a little lad. Oh, they're both cracked, said Ted. Leastways old Bilbo was cracked, and Frodo's cracking. If that's where you get your news from, you'll never want for moonshine. Well, friends, I'm off home. Your good health. He drained his mug and went out noisily. Sam sat silent and said no more. He had a good deal to think about. For one thing, there was a lot to do up in the Bag End garden, and he would have a busy day tomorrow if the weather cleared. The grass was growing fast, but Sam had more on his mind than gardening. After a while he sighed and got up and went out. It was early April, and the sky was now clearing after heavy rain. The sun was down, and a cool, pale evening was quietly fading into the night. He walked home under the early stars, through Hobbiton and up the hill, whistling softly and thoughtfully. It was just at this time that Gandalf reappeared after his long absence. For 3 years after the party he had been away. Then he paid Frodo a brief visit, and after taking a good look at him, he went off again. During the next year or two he had turned up fairly often, coming unexpectedly after dusk, and going off without warning before sunrise. He would not discuss his own business and journeys, and seemed chiefly interested in small news about Frodo's health and doings. Then suddenly his visits had ceased. It was over 9 years since Frodo had seen or heard of him, and he had begun to think that the wizard would never return, and had given up all interest in hobbits. But that evening, as Sam was walking home, and twilight was fading, there came the once familiar tap on the study window. Frodo welcomed his old friend with surprise and great delight. They looked hard at one another. "Ah, well, said Gandalf. "You look the same as ever, Frodo." "So do you," Frodo replied, but secretly he thought that Gandalf looked older and more careworn. He pressed him for news of himself and the wide world, and soon they were deep in talk, and they stayed up far into the night. Next morning, after a late breakfast, the wizard was sitting with Frodo by the open window of the study. A bright fire was on the hearth, but the sun was warm, and the wind was in the south. Everything looked fresh, and the new green of spring was shimmering in the fields, and on the tips of the trees as fingers. Gandalf was thinking of a spring nearly 80 years before, when Bilbo had run out of Bag End without a handkerchief. His hair was perhaps whiter than it had been then, and his beard and eyebrows were perhaps longer, and his face more lined with care and wisdom, but his eyes were as bright as ever, and he smoked and blew smoke rings with the same vigour and delight. He was smoking now in silence, for Frodo was sitting still, deep in thought. Even in the light of morning he felt the dark shadow of the tidings that Gandalf had brought. At last he broke the silence. "Last night you began to tell me strange things about my ring, Gandalf," he said, "and then you stopped, because you said that such matters were best left until daylight. Don't you think you'd better finish now? You say the ring is dangerous, far more dangerous than I guess. In what way?" "In many ways," answered the wizard. "It is far more powerful than I ever dared to think at first. So powerful that in the end it would utterly overcome any one of mortal race who possessed it. It would possess him. In Eregion, long ago, many elven rings were made, magic rings as you call them, and they were, of course, of various kinds, some more potent and some less. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft, but it was full grown, and to the elven smiths they were but trifles, yet still to my mind dangerous for mortals. But the great rings, the rings of power, they were perilous. Immortal Frodo, who keeps one of the great rings, does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues until the last. Every minute is a weariness, and if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes in the end invisible permanently, and walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. Yes, sooner or later. Later if he is strong or well meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good will purpose will last. Sooner or later the dark power will devour him." "How terrifying!" said Frodo. There was another long silence. The sound of Sam Gamgee cutting the lawn came in from the garden. "How long have you known this?" asked Frodo at length. "And how much did Bilbo know?" "Bilbo knew no more than he told you, I'm sure," said Gandalf. "He would certainly never have passed on to you anything that he thought would be a danger, even though I promised to look after you. He thought the ring was very beautiful and very useful indeed, and if anything was wrong or queer, it was himself. He said that it was growing on his mind, and he was always worrying about it, but he did not suspect that the ring itself was to blame. Though he had found out that the thing needed looking after, it did not seem always of the same size or weight. It shrank or expanded in an odd way, and might suddenly slip off a finger where it had been tight. Yes, he warned me of that in his last letter, said Frodo. So I've always kept it on its chain. Very wise, said Gandalf. But as for his long life, Bilbo never connected it with the ring at all. He took all the credit for that himself, and he was very proud of it, though he was getting restless and uneasy. Thin and stretched, he said, a sign that the ring was getting control. How long have you known all this? Asked Frodo again. Known? Said Gandalf. I've known much that only the wise know, Frodo, but if you mean known about this ring, well, I still do not know, one might say. There is a last test to make, but I no longer doubt my guess. When did I first begin to guess? He mused, searching back in his memory. Let me see. It was in the year the White Council drove the Dark Power from Mirkwood just before the Battle of the Five Armies that Bilbo found his ring. A shadow fell on my heart then, though I did not know yet what I feared. I wondered often how Gollum came by a great ring as plainly as it was. That at least was clear from the first. Then I heard Bilbo's strange story of how he had won it, and I could not believe it. When I at last got the truth out of him, I saw at once that he had been trying to push his claim to the ring beyond doubt, much like Gollum with his birthday present. The lies were too much alike for my comfort. Clearly, the ring had an unwholesome power that set to work on its keeper at once. That was the first real warning I had, that all was not well. I told Bilbo often that such rings were better left unused, but he resented it and soon got angry. There was little else I could do. I could not take it from him without doing greater harm, and I had no right to do so anyway. I could only watch and wait. I might perhaps have consulted Saruman the White, but Frodo always held me. But something always held me back. Who is he? Asked Frodo. I've never heard of him before. Maybe not, answered Gandalf. Hobbits are, well, no concern of his. Yet he is great among the wise. He is the chief of my order and the head of the council. His knowledge is deep, but his pride has grown with it, and he takes ill any meddling. The lore of the elven rings, great and small, is his province. He has long studied it, seeking the lost secrets of their making. But when the rings were debated in the council, all that he would reveal to us of his ring lore told us against my fears. So my doubts slept, but uneasily. I still watched, and I waited. And all seemed well with Bilbo, and the years passed. Yes, they passed, and they seemed not to touch him. He showed no signs of age. The shadows fell on me again, but I said to myself, after all, he comes of a long-lived family on his mother's side. There is time yet. Wait. And I waited until that night when he left this house. He said and did things then that filled me with a fear that no words of Saruman could allay. I knew at last that something dark and deadly was at work, and I've spent most of the years since then in finding out the truth of it. There wasn't any permanent harm done, was there? Asked Frodo, anxiously. He would get all right in time, wouldn't he? Be able to rest in peace, I mean? He felt better at once, said Gandalf, but there is only one power in this world that knows all about the rings and their effects, and as far as I know, there is no power in the world that knows all about hobbits. Among the wise, I'm the only one that goes in for hobbit lore, an obscure branch of knowledge, but full of surprises. Soft as butter they can be, and yet sometimes as tough as old tree roots. I think it likely that some would resist the rings far longer than most of the wise would believe. I don't think you need to worry about Bilbo, of course. He possessed the ring for many years and used it, so it might take a long while for the influence to wear off. But it was safe for him to see it again, for instance. Otherwise, he might live on for years, quite happily, just stop as he was when he parted with it. For he gave it up in the end of his own accord. An important point. No, I was not troubled about dear Bilbo any more. Once he had let the thing go, it is for you that I feel responsible. Ever since Bilbo left, I have been deeply concerned about you, and all about these charming, absurd, helpless hobbits. It would be a grievous blow to the world if the Dark Power overcame the Shire. If all your kind, jolly, stupid Bolgers, Hornblowers, Buffins, Bracegirdles, and the rest, not to mention the ridiculous Bagginses, became enslaved. Frodo shuddered. But why should we be? He asked. Why should he want such slaves? To tell you the truth, replied Gandalf, I believe that hitherto, mark you, he has entirely overlooked the existence of hobbits. You should be thankful, but your safety has passed. He does not need you. He has many more useful servants, but he won't forget you again. And hobbits as miserable slaves would please him far more than hobbits happy and free. There is such a thing as malice and revenge. Revenge? Said Frodo. Revenge for what? I still don't understand what all this has to do with Bilbo and myself. And a ring. It has everything to do with it, said Gandalf. You do not know the real peril yet, but you shall. I was not sure of it myself when I was last here, but the time has come to speak. Give me the ring for a moment. Frodo took it from his breeches pocket, where it was clasped to a chain that hung from his belt. He unfastened it and handed it slowly to the wizard. It felt suddenly very heavy, as if either it or Frodo himself was in some way reluctant for Gandalf to touch it. Gandalf held it up. It looked to be made of pure and solid gold. Could you see any markings on it? He asked. No, said Frodo. There are none. It's quite plain and it never shows a scratch or sign of wear. Well then, look. To Frodo's astonishment and distress, the wizard threw it suddenly into the middle of a glowing corner of the fire. Frodo gave a cry and groped for the tongs, but Gandalf held him back. Wait, he said in a commanding voice, giving Frodo a quick look from under his bristling brows. No apparent change came over the ring. After, after a while, Gandalf got up, closed the shutters outside the window, and drew the curtains. The room became dark and silent, though the clack of Sam's shears, now nearer to the windows, could still be heard faintly from the garden. For a moment the wizard stood looking at the fire, then he stooped and removed the ring to the hearth with the tongs, and at once picked it up. Frodo gasped. It is quite cool, said Gandalf. Take it. Frodo received it on his shrinking palm. It seemed to have become thicker and heavier than ever. Hold it up, said Gandalf, and look closely. As Frodo did so, he now saw fine lines, finer than the finest pen strokes, running along the ring, outside and inside, lines of fire that seemed to form the letters of a flowing script. They shone piercingly, bright, and yet remote, as if out of a great depth. I cannot read the fiery letters, said Frodo, in a quavering voice. No, said Gandalf, but I can. The letters are elvish, of an ancient mode, but the language is that of Mordor, which I will not utter here. But this in the common tongue is what is said close enough. One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. It is only 2 lines of a verse long known in elven lore. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, and the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. He paused, and then said slowly in a deep voice, "This is the Master Ring, the 1 ring to rule them all. This is the 1 ring that he lost many ages ago to the great weakening of his power. He greatly desires it, but he must not get it." Frodo sat silent and motionless. Fear seemed to stretch out a vast hand, like a dark cloud rising in the east and looming up to engulf him. "This ring," he stammered. How on earth did it come to me?" "Ah," said Gandalf, "that is a very long story. The beginnings lie back in the Black Years, which only the lore masters now remember. If I were to tell you all that tale, we should still be sitting here when spring had passed into winter. But last night I told you of Sauron the Great, the Dark Lord. The rumours that you have heard are true. He has indeed arisen again, and he has left his hold in Mirkwood and returned to his ancient fastness in the Dark Tower of Mordor. That name even you hobbits have heard of, like a shadow on the borders of old stories. Always after a defeat and a respite, the shadow takes another shape and grows again. "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. And already, Frodo, our time is beginning to look black. The enemy is fast becoming very strong. His plans are far from ripe, I think, but they are ripening. We shall be hard to put to it. We should be very hard put to it, even if it were not for this dreadful chance. The enemy still lacks the one thing to give him strength and knowledge to beat down all resistance, break the last defences, and cover all the lands in a second darkness. He lacks the one ring. The 3 fairest of all the elf lords hid from him, and his hand never touched them or sullied them. 7 the dwarf kings possessed, but 3 he has recovered, and the others the dragons have consumed. 9 he gave to mortal men, proud and great, and so ensnared them. Long ago they fell under the dominion of the One, and they became ring wraiths, shadows under his great shadow, his most terrible servants. Long ago, it is many a year since the 9 walked abroad. Yet who knows? As the shadow grows once more, they too walk again. But come, we will not speak of such things even in the morning of the Shire. So it is now, the 9 he has gathered to himself, the 7 also, or else they are destroyed. The 3 are all hidden, but that no longer troubles him. He only needs the one, for he made that ring himself. It is his, and he's let a great part of his own former power pass into it, so that he could rule all the others. If he recovers it, then he will command them all again, wherever they may be, even the 3, and all that has been wrought with them will be laid bare, and he will be stronger than ever. And this is the dreadful chance, Frodo. He believed that the one had perished, that the elves had destroyed it as it should have been done. But he knows now that it has not perished, that it has been found, so he is seeking it, and all his thought is bent on it, as his great hope and our great fear. why wasn't it destroyed? Cried Frodo. And how did the enemy ever come to lose it? If he was so strong and it was so precious to him. He clutched the ring in his hand as if he saw already dark fingers stretching out to seize it. It was taken from him, said Gandalf. The strength of the elves to resist him was greater long ago, and not all men were estranged from them. The men of the Westernesse came to their aid. That is a chapter of an ancient history which might be good to recall, for there was sorrow then too, and gathering dark, but great valour and great deeds that were not wholly vain. One day, perhaps, I will tell you all the tale, or you shall hear it told in full by one who knows it best. But for the moment, since most of all you need to know how this thing came to you, and that there will be tale enough, this is all that I will say. It was Gil-galad, elven king of Elendil of Westernesse, who overthrew Sauron, though they themselves perished in the deed. And Isildur, Elendil's son, cut the ring from Sauron's hand and took it for his own. Then Sauron was vanquished, and his spirit fled and was hidden for long years until his shadow took shape again in Mirkwood. But the ring was lost, fell into the great river Anduin, and vanished. For Isildur was marching north along the east banks of the river, and near the Gladden fields he was waylaid by the orcs of the mountains, and almost all his folk were slain. He leaped into the waters, but the ring slipped from his finger as he swam, and then the orcs saw him and killed him with arrows. Gandalf paused. And there, in the dark pools amid the Gladden fields, he said, the ring passed out of knowledge and legend, and even so much of its history is known now only to a few, and the council of the wise could discover no more. But at last I can carry on the story, I think. Long after, but still very long ago, there lived by the banks of the great river on the edge of Wilderland a clever-handed and quiet-footed little people. I guess they were of hobbit kind, akin to the fathers of the Stoors, for they loved the river, and often swam in it, or made little boats of reeds. There was among them a family of high repute, for it was large and wealthier than most, and it was ruled by a grandmother of the folk, stern and wise in old lore, such as they had. The most inquisitive and curious-minded of that family was called Smeagol. He was interested in roots and beginnings. He dived into deep pools. He burrowed under trees and growing plants. He tunneled into green mounds, and he ceased to look up at the hilltops, or the leaves on trees, or the flowers opening in the air. His head and his eyes were downward. He had a friend called Deagle, of similar sort, sharper-eyed, but not so quick and strong. On a time they took a boat and went down to the Gladden fields, where there were great beds of iris and flowering reeds. There Smeagol got out and went nosing about the banks, but Deagle sat in the boat and fished. Suddenly a great fish took his hook, and before he knew where he was dragged out and down into the water to the bottom. Then he let go of his line, for he thought he saw something shining in the river bed, and holding his breath, he grabbed at it. Then up he came spluttering with weeds, and his hair had a handful of mud, and he swam to the bank, and behold, when he washed the mud away, there in his hand lay a beautiful golden ring, and it shone and glittered in the sun, so that his heart was glad. But Smeagol had been watching him from behind the tree, and as Deagle gloated over the ring, Smeagol came up softly behind. "Give us that to Deagle, my love," said Smeagol over his French shoulder. "Why?" "Because it's my birthday, my love, and I want it," said Smeagol. "I don't care," said Deagle. "I've given you a present already, more than I could afford. I found this, and I'm going to keep it." "Oh, you are indeed, my love," said Smeagol, and he caught Deagle by the throat and strangled him because the gold looked so bright and beautiful. Then he put the ring on his finger. No one ever found out what had become of Deagle. He was murdered far from home, and his body was cunningly hidden. But Smeagol returned alone, and he found that none of his family could see him when he was wearing the ring. He was very pleased with his discovery, and he concealed it, and he used it to find out secrets, and he put his knowledge to crooked and malicious uses. He became sharp-eyed and keen-eared, for all that was hurtful. The ring had given him power according to his stature. It was not to be wondered at the at that he became very unpopular and was shunned when visible by all his relations. They kicked him, and he bit their feet. He took to thieving, and going about muttering to himself and gurgling in his throat. So they called him Gollum, and cursed him, and told him to go away. And his grandmother, desiring peace, expelled him from the family, and turned him out of her hole. I'm going to stop there. Um, I do hope you enjoyed listening to me read a bit of the Lord of the Rings. We will continue at a point that I deem as necessary. But again, in the meantime, for anyone that did join me, I do really appreciate the you listening in, and it yeah, make sure you tune in a couple of weeks when I have the Balderdash campaign back on. That would be Sunday, the 14th of June. Where we'll have, Ethan of the Sonland on again, and possibly perhaps Connor of Libertalia again. But again, in the meantime, everyone, I appreciate you tuning in, and of course.